Well, good morning. My back timer worked today. We got in just on time. So, welcome to Mythbusters for a brand new weekend, the last full week of Mythbusters. I think we're wrapping it up this week, as a matter of fact. And we're going to do a two-parter here, the first of two today, on the whole subject of audio chains. Do I need a processing chain? This can be a very emotional issue for some people. They take it extremely seriously, and there are lots of opinions and lots of good opinions. So I'm not here to thrust one down your throat. I'll just give you a little bit of my own information about audio chains, let you draw your own conclusions. Today, do I need an audio processing chain? First of all, what is an audio processing chain? It goes by so many different names that people can get it all kind of confused. Some people call it a signal chain, or an FX chain, an effects chain, an audio chain, a plug-in chain, a post-processing chain. So it goes by lots of names. And it's nothing new. They've been around for a long time. Audio chains were a part of radio from the time when I was first in it, and from well before that. I joined into radio in 1976, and audio chains were old news then, but they weren't software plugins like we think of today. So that's one of the things we'll talk about. Also, what does an audio chain usually consist of? We'll talk about that. The advantages and the disadvantages of using audio chains, and are there any alternatives to using audio chains? But first of all, what is it? Usually an audio chain refers to a sequence of filters arranged in a particular order. They can do something as simple as turning the volume up or down on the sound, to cleaning up noise, mouth noise, room noise, ambient sounds, rumble, things like that. They can be used to compensate for inadequacies in your microphone, or to try and match your mic better to your voice. They can also help to compensate for inadequacies in your recording space. Sometimes they can just slightly remove, for example, a little bit of room echo. Those kind of things can work or not work. And in general, I have less than a lot of faith in trying to remove room echo through a filter, but it's another thing that people sometimes do with audio chains. And they can also be used to make your voice sound more impressive, more powerful, give it more edge, give it more boom. Audio chains have been around for a long time. They actually predate modern voiceovers, as I mentioned earlier. In radio, it can refer to the links that lead from the studio to the transmitter. And those can include the studio control board itself. The microphone goes into the control board. The control board sometimes will go into a distribution amp, which will take the audio output from the control board and maybe spread it out to other studios in the building, or send it on its way to the processor, which is used to beef up the signal to make it more effective when it's put out, for example, over an FM or an AM broadcast. Then to the exciter, which takes that audio signal and turns it into something that can be transmitted. And from there to the transmitter, which sends it up the tower, and out it goes to the listeners. So these all are forms of audio chains. Before there was software for voiceover, there were boxes, effects boxes, DBXs, things like that. Mic processing went through physical gear, so it wasn't uncommon to see some rack-mountable gear that could do things like mic processing. Another thing that could be done with audio boxes was, let's say if I was recording with my voice and I was recording it onto tape, like this tape deck here. And tape decks have a certain amount of, tape just inherently has a certain amount of hiss on it. So you would send it through an encoder that would kind of reshape the audio and save it onto the tape in such a way that the tape hiss would be less evident when playing it back through a decoder that would re-expand the audio minus the hiss. So and DBX made those, and those could be a part of a processing chain. But in general, they were just a mic processing or an audio processing piece of gear that could be used for tape recordings. For modern audio chains, Generally, there are two approaches that are taken to it. One is a box, like we talked about, something that the microphone goes into, and then the box is sent from there into your computer. And there are effects right in the box itself. And that is definitely still done, but it's not as common as software-only plugins these days. I think a lot of people have just a straight interface that it basically just takes your mic audio and it converts it into digital and sends it to your computer. But there are preamps, that's what they call them, preamps, that can be used with microphones, and those can be used to pre-process your audio before it ever even reaches the computer or is even recorded. And then there are the post-processing type. Those are more common, and especially these days. One of the downsides to the pre-processing box is that it is locked in. It's what my boss used to call, of other things, stainless steel underwear. There's no wriggle room. Once you have actually run your mic through a pre-processing box, there's no going back. Once you've recorded it, that's it. And one of the catches with that is that if you can't really process per job that way very well, or if you do, you have to be sure that you change things back on the box to how they were before. Whereas with filters, you have more tweakability there. Filters are a post-processing idea in most cases, rather than you're recording through the software and affecting the voice on the incoming end. Instead, after you've done your recording, then you run your processing and do whatever you want to prepare it for distribution. And that type of processing is what we're going to be talking about today. In terms of filters, in no particular order, here are some of the ones. Well, let's put them in typical order. Let's do it like that. Here are some of the ones that we see people use. One is called low-cut equalization, basically, or notch filtering. And in that case, if you were to view the band, the breadth of frequencies that your voice is in, and you were to slice it into bands going across, the lower end of the band, I'm trying to do this in reverse of what I'm doing here, the lower end of the band, there would be a notch where you would turn down the equalization or reduce the amount of volume of sound at certain frequencies where rumble occurs, where you have extraneous noise, which would not be something that your voice, it's not an area where your voice would be. So therefore, by notching that down, generally, because you're not recording music, you're not really affecting anything other than just getting rid of what could be some noise at the lower end of your recording signal and reducing the possibility of some rumble. That's a pretty useful filter. There's broadband compression. That adds punch to your sound. There's noise reduction, and that cleans up some additional noise, for example, ambient room noise, computer fans, things like that. There's mouth click removal, which can be a very effective tool. That's one that I use because otherwise you can sometimes hear little mouth sounds in recordings, and a good mouth click remover is a nice tool. De-essing is not always necessary. It depends on you. Some males and quite a few females will have a piercing S sound. It comes from a good thin membrane connection between the tongue and the top of the mouth that gives a very tight, high-frequency S. And so that's one of those things that if you have that, you can do either through equalization or through a filter some removal of that piercing S sound. And then there are limiters. And a limiter is a very nice basic tool that just cuts down the highest peaks in your voiceover. And then there's normalization, which takes everything and turns it up to a certain volume. And generally for voiceover, they say minus 3 dB is kind of a standard as to a volume level that you would send your audio over at. The advantages of using an audio chain is that it can be used to compensate for and to fix certain problems, noise reduction, mouth noise, to adjust your mic to your voice. If you've chosen a mic that, yeah, it sounds good, but it could sound better because of how the voice sounds and how your mic sounds, you can do some compensating there with EQ to get your mic to sound the best it can with your particular voice. To reduce the dynamic range, which again gives it more punch, to sound more impressive, which equalization can do for you, and so can compression. And also to meet special requirements, to get your noise floor in a certain range, and to prepare things for example, audiobooks that are, ACX has its set of standards that you need to meet for how the audio sounds and the way the waveform is structured and so on, how much noise there is, and so on. Disadvantages to an audio chain. Number one, it adds to your workflow. It requires time to run audio processing. Usually what happens is you record yourself first, and then afterwards you apply your audio chain to it, and the audio chain takes time to process, especially if there are multiple steps that it has to go through. As those steps are being processed, each one takes some time, and some of them, like compression, take a good deal of time. Just depending on the length of the file that you're processing and how fast your computer is. It also at least doubles storage requirements. If you are able to just deliver your audio raw, in other words, you just record it to a file, the file gets sent to the client, you have one file, and it's the raw original audio file. If you do processing on the raw audio file and you save that and send that to the client, now you could get rid of your original raw audio file, but if they come back to you and say, we need these changes, now you have to refer back, pardon the bump, refer back to your original raw audio file and make your changes there really first, and then reprocess it again. So that means you have to keep 2 copies of everything and keep track of 2 copies of everything. And in the case of a mic preamp, that approach, there is no going back, as we mentioned. It also makes updating a voiceover more complex and more of a chore, as I mentioned. In addition to making the changes that are requested, then you have to reprocess again and send that over. And it is not usually required or requested by the client. Now, this is where maybe some people will disagree with me. I can just tell you from my own personal experience that, for example, on Fiverr, where I do a lot of work, I have maybe once or twice in 3,000 orders had someone say, add some compression or add some effects, add reverb or whatever like that. But most of the time, what people want is just your voiceover. And if you're working with studios, for example, I do a lot of work for a studio in nearby Green Bay, but I've also done work for studios all over the place. They generally want a raw file. They want to do their own magic on it. They don't want you to, basically it's like editorializing the audio for you to process it before sending it to them. They want to do their magic on it and make it sound the way they want it to sound. So sending them something that's all punched up and processed and squeezed and stroked and so forth is not something that they want. On the other side of the coin, just yesterday, I got a request for a bid on a project where they made a very big point of do not use processing, do not use noise reduction, do not use EQ, do not use reverb. They said, give us the straight raw file. So I get requests for that more often than I do for processed content. If you are using a microphone that loves your voice and it just reproduces you well and it's clean, you're running it into a good audio chain, audio chain here I should say, just it's running through a good cable into a good interface box, into a computer that can record well, you will have a good product that you can supply without doing much to it at all. Now, I'm not saying nothing. And in my second of these 2 adventures in the next couple of days, I'll talk about the things that I do. But generally, most people don't expect you to process their audio for them. If they either want it raw or they want to do their own thing with it. Here are some of the dangers of using audio chains. Number one, it's really easy to overdo it. And boy, I have heard some demos where they just pounded the compression. The equalization was really, really kind of exaggerated. Especially people tend to exaggerate the low end because they think that's going to make it sound more impressive. And it's just onerous. It hurts the ears. It hurts the brain. And it's not going to be something, you don't want your demo to sound much different than what you're going to deliver to people. So overdoing it on the demo is kind of a mistake, I think. Here's another thing that can be a hazard, and that's trying to use the same audio chain as somebody else. So the things that I'm going to be recommending actually are things that pretty much everyone could do, but they're not. Well, we'll get into it. I'll show you what I do and what I don't do. But don't just say, okay, what do you do in your audio chain, and then try to use the same thing, especially when it comes to EQ. There are so many factors that enter into this related to your room, your microphone, your voice, the distance you're going to be from your mic, just lots of things. So to just say, okay, here's an audio chain everybody can use, that's not a good idea at all. A lot of people don't have the ear for it. What they hear when they do it is not necessarily something that's going to sound good to the general public or to the studio they're going to send it to. And it's subjective. Not all clients are going to like the same thing. So just as your ear may be different, their ears may be different from each other's. So to try and make assumptions in advance about what is going to be the best sound for the client is not always something that's easy to do. And the other thing is that you wind up having to compensate for different kinds of voiceovers. There are going to be voiceovers where if you start thinking in terms of audio chain, well, this one ought to be more this way and this one ought to be more that way. And one of the big problems there is getting back to what you normally do again, getting back to your normal settings, and then remembering for one particular project, in case it has to be updated, what you did with that one. Now, next time, we're going to talk about the Dane chain. I'll tell you what I do, what I don't do. I'll give you some thought starters and some ideas and some ways that you can simplify and, in some cases, eliminate elements of an audio chain. So that's what we'll do next time. I would love for you to check out the Gig Winners course if you are interested in preparing a demo. This is not to sell you on the idea of having someone else do a demo for you. It's primarily to show you what goes into a demo, and so you can draw some conclusions about maybe you just would prefer to do one yourself. As you've heard from my previous discussions here in MythBusters, it is very possible, especially early on, for a person to do their own demo. But at any rate, doing one well is important. There are lots of ways to succeed in voiceover, but they all converge at the demo. So the demo's got to be great, and Gig Winners can show you some really good tips from some really good people in the group. The people I interviewed for the course, it's $75. You can get that at thegigdoctor.com, thegigdoctor.com. And the Fiverr and Upwork Voiceover Lounge is my favorite hangout. I'll bet you it will be yours too. Lots of really neat people in there, and you're a neat person. I'd like you to join us. That's at Facebook. It's a free group, and there's no obligations or anything to it. It's just a place where we can all hang out, enjoy each other's company, meet Lizzie the lounge lizard in there, our official mascot, and talk about voiceovers, especially those done on Fiverr and Upwork. Some pay-to-play action there. If you need some coaching done, I'm doing that. It's $50 at a reduced basis for a full hour. And during that time, we can cover a lot of important ground together on where you're at presently, baselining you, and then beyond that, what you can do to improve and step you forward toward a better demo, toward just better delivery, whatever it is that between the two of us we think is going to be good for your situation. So you can just send me a personal message if you'd like about that on Facebook, or you can call 920-672-8255. 8244 for some coaching or just for an analysis of where things are at with you. You know, should I be thinking about doing voiceovers? Before you go out and buy a bunch of gear, it's a good idea to get assessed. You know, get a second opinion, get a third opinion. I'll give you a second, I'll give you a third, whatever you want. But I think it's a really good idea rather than investing a lot of your money and your time in something before you're sure to get assessed. So again, contact me there if you'd like that. And that wraps it up for today. The Dane chain tomorrow. We'll talk more about some of the possibilities there. I don't think we have a lot of comments to cover here, so we're pretty much done for today. And again, we'll be here at 11 o'clock Central Time on Tuesday, October 28th. So we'll look forward to spending that time with you then. Thanks a lot.